very honored to start and open the debate, probably the last debate of 2018. So Happy New Year to all of you. Now, in doing this motion, I think that an important thing we need to do as Bamuza Society is tell you what our goal is. And let's be clear from the get-go that what opening government wants is the depoliticization of the economy. We think that the attachment of political figures to the dollar has allowed these countries to stay in the bottom and not receive any kind of assistance, whether from home or abroad, that would help boost their economy and eventually the lives of people. I think that the assumption that nationalization of these companies essentially lies on is the assumption that government is a generally preferable actor in that it is transparent, generally more accountable in many situations, and can address niches in the market that private companies would otherwise not want to enter. But here's the thing, that when we want the privatization of these companies in developing countries, there are several characteristics of these developing nations that we do not desire and we do not think is compatible with the entire assumption of government being a good actor. I identified 4 of these for your convenience. The first would be a lack of infrastructure that would allow economic lines to run very well. The second would be a lack of democratic accountability and transparency. The third would be ethnic tensions and religious tensions that have not been resolved and cannot be resolved in a democratic manner because of the lack of the aforementioned systems. And the fourth would be a large disparity between the rich and poor. Why is the fourth one a major problem? We think that the very disparity between the rich and poor and the lack of a lot of privatized economic avenues makes the avenue for success for the average person extremely narrow. That they need to rely on government or government-sponsored jobs in order to guarantee a safe position in the workforce and to guarantee that their family can also survive. We think that this is exactly the opposite of a country that has a large, thriving private sector. 2 arguments to push for today. The first is why government is not really the ideal actor in these developing countries, and in the second, I will explain why even if the government is generally a desirable actor, I will take this down using free market principles. Now, the first argument is divided into 4 main levels. The first level is that we don't want the government to be able to politicize these issues and take preference of certain ethnic or religious groups over others. No, thank you. We think that the voter base that forms the key of the political capital and the political power of the incumbent government gets the most investment, and the areas with the strong and dominant ethnic or religious groups will be prioritized. Because the necessary infrastructure and services are often offered on a geographical level, because that's how the economy works, and these ethnic or religious minorities are usually concentrated in a certain select geographical area, we think that it is only logical that these companies are now allowed to invest in these select areas and call them actually advantageous economic choke points that they must address. But we think that this can easily be abused by a lot of states, such as states with a small minority taking the power over a large majority. That will be the Alawites in Syria, or say the government in Bahrain. On the second level, we think that this is a great avenue for nepotism to flourish. We think that the use of company as a hereditary monarchy is extremely problematic. If you have a private company, the transfer of ownership to your offspring or to your family members may be okay because it is your own. But when you are now dealing with the country's entire economic or social infrastructure, you are basically allowing your sons and daughters to inherit these as well. And we think that this has many undesirable consequences. An example would be Angola decided to allow the president's daughter to rule most of Angola's oil reserves. And you can ask the Angolans how well that's going. Now, the third level is going to be that the government can use it to control people's lives. And yes, it is a whopping assumption, but it happens every day in reality. If you look at countries like Bahrain, they usurp and take away people's citizenships, allowing them to enter the country if they're outside and exit the country if they're inside. We think that people will be naturally reliant on the country's economy, and once the government has control of this economy, it basically controls people's livelihoods, and that's how people keep their feet tied and their political mouths shut. The same happens for Venezuela. We again know what happened to Venezuela recently when the state-owned company did not really do well. We think that it doesn't have to be as dystopian as Bahrain, even by the very fact that most of the welfare that people are provided comes as an offshoot of these national companies, means that once this company goes bankrupt or is economically inefficient, these people's livelihoods will be severely harmed. So far I've explained to you that it can be maliciously used, and on the second level, it doesn't really have to be malicious to have an extreme impact on people's lives. But I assume that closing would differ.
Yeah, given the large corruption that you described, it's much more likely that this will pass on to specifically very rich and affluent individuals which are close to the government.
That's exactly our point, that the next ruler of this company will most likely come from the pockets of these politicians who are controlling the company now. Okay? So I think that if you really one's different, you need to further prove it on. Now, the fourth and final point of this argument is that you are susceptible to influences from other governments. That if your state-owned enterprise has a certain industry and another government wants to subsidize it, i.e. China's neocolonial products in Africa and this very region, and to some extent in Southeast Asia, it is much easier for these kinds of governments to intertwine their economies and eventually make their economy subservient to another. We have many cases in which state-owned corporations that are backed by the Communist Party are rushing in to influence the state-owned corporations in the Sahel region and in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Myanmar and Southeast Asia. The second argument is going to talk about basically the free market. The first is going to be about the free market principles itself. I think that accountability and efficiency-wise, it's very clear that the free market has more accountability because the politicians can't really go corrupt because, as they're not running the economy. But I think the more important thing is that secondly, it is impossible to diversify the economy to the extent that a privately owned corporation would. Because these governments basically have their power in security and stability, they will not take the risk to venture outside of their comfort zone. And this really leads to the final point, about political legitimacy. Because if you look at how political legitimacy is a key part of what a government does, it becomes incapable of backing in and out of unprofitable industries and unpalatable industries because it has a political legitimacy to stay there and guarantee people's livelihoods. We have an example of the employment crisis in Zimbabwe. Now that most people rely on the government for their jobs and the Zimbabwean dollar has basically gone to shit, they really can't pay any of their employees, which has resulted in the entire country going nearly bankrupt. And this final level is about the foreign direct investment. We think that these countries, developing countries, are especially reliant on the input and the economic input of more developed other countries. And we think that if you are politicizing your economy, you are much less likely to invest in that government. Countries are unwilling to be investing in politically iffy scenarios, especially if it brings cause to religious or ethnic tension. And as a matter of trust, we think that there's a possibility of relocating or evading a certain political situation that is unique to a private company that a publicly owned national company can never do. Happy New Year.
I thank very much the Prime Minister for his remarks, but the Leader of Opposition to present the opposition position here.
Let's first and foremost address what exactly privatization looks like, because that's something openly government ever wanted to explain. First and foremost is the process that you can possibly have an open tender and you allow people to actually buy a lot of these dams, a lot of reserves that exist in status quo, right? It means that even in a situation in which the government is selling with your ancestor or like with your siblings or whatever, that is a form of privatization also because you allow an open tender process, and that's why it came on the hands of someone else. Nationalization and if you like owning it as a government means that part of you, that means the person and the the organization body that's taking care of a lot of these resources are the government in of itself. Rather, there's less room for it to be nepotistic because it has to exist among the government. The room for nepotism to happen is a role in which oftentimes privatization occurs and you get to be selective of who you pass this to. We think it's a lot easier for you to control that form of corruption in a role in which you do not have the ability to pass your obligation to another company. Second, what does privatization look like? It looks like, for example, it means that you have the ability to, number one, these corporations have the ability to build these amenities, sit down. For example, having dams, that means these things are oftentimes under their control. It means that they have an ability to control prices. And like the second question is, what does this grant them? And I think this is extremely important. We think what it grants the corporation is oftentimes autonomy to control a lot of these prices, and this is precisely extremely harmful on how you engage them. It's for a few reasons. Number one, it's oftentimes the fact that because if they won a tender, that means they were the strongest competitor. It is most likely they had the most resources to monopolize a lot of these utilities and amenities to begin with, and a lot of this industry. Why is this so? Because of their financial capacities, the fact that they won the tender and was able to actually beat a lot of these other people, it means unlikely for other corporations to be able to buy them or other corporations to exist as competition to begin with. The exact fact that they monopolize means that they have the capacity to control the prices. But secondly is the fact that they can kill off competition because they're holding such necessity and utility in and of itself. It's unlikely for another corporation to be able to beat this corporation because they already won the tender to begin with. But it's also unlikely for you to have two forms of utility, people building utilities in a nation, because it's very likely for them to only have one dam or one main form of resources in most times in building utilities. It's unlikely for competition to exist. Secondly, they have ability lobby because as a company, oftentimes corporations will have influence on the government because of this, and we'll tell you why later. It's extremely harmful. But the most important thing about corporations is that all of these things are maneuvered by one thing. It's the fact that they are oftentimes profit-oriented and they oftentimes are money-hungry. And it's also secondly because they have zero obligation towards the people. They can prioritize money most of the times. Anyways, we think this is extremely harmful. Before going on to why number one, privatization is at the end of the day, corporations are going to be exploitative and proceeding to why that's extremely harmful, I would first get to a few things that opening government said. Number one, they said that, oh, governments are going to be selective. First and foremost, it's a comparative, right? In a world in which number one, why is government not likely to be selective? Because literally these people who vote against you, right? Even if you are the minority, it's very likely the fact that people are not everybody wants to screw over the minority. And in a world in which a government fails, clearly the majority is also going to be against the government for not being able to actually have all of these minorities. The very few elites are the ones that are going to benefit. And it's not the only people that are most probably going to be in favor of the government. The majorities are going to be extremely upset if utilities are going to reach their homes. Secondly is the fact that oftentimes if a government is going to hold a lot of these things, it's very likely that it's going to have a spillover. You cannot just build a railway station and say, oh, only rich people can enter a lot of these places, right? It's most likely that if government builds utilities, it's going to be accessible to anyone in that geographical area. It's not likely for them to be able to be selective in the specific circumstances, right? So because they are oftentimes more so the fact that they are more accountable and oftentimes they cannot be selective is the reason why this is not going to happen. Right, moving on. Moving on to what another thing they said, right? Just to touch on this. The fact that, recession is going to happen, government cannot give you a lot of things, right? But the problem is that even if government, number one, a lot of the times recession has a lot of factors as to why it happened. It's not like the fact that because they don't have money spending, they're going to adopt a lot of things. But in a case in which your economy is literally falling, I would like to think that they want their still in control of the government because then the government can choose to actually give it to a lot of people. In comparison to you having a recession and your government failing and the dams are in the hands of the corporations, then at that point you know you're truly screwed because the government cannot have control as to what utilities goes to what people. First argument, what exactly does privatization, why exactly this privatization is going to be exploited? Let's first analyze what developing countries need, because that's not necessarily what opening government came that told us. We think the most important thing is accessibility for a lot of these things. Because understanding developing nations, what you want is number one, to have this railway actually be accessible in order for you to use it as mobility for employment, or for you to have water in order for you to put food on the table and simple things like this. It's not I think this is the most priority, the utmost priority in this debate of whether or not it can be accessible to a lot of these people. Because even if there's good quality utilities, it's very unlikely to be beneficial if you can't really have access to a lot of these things. So how is it likely for us to make it accessible? We think it's most important for us to make it as cheap as possible. And I'll tell you why oftentimes when it comes to corporations, why it's not going to happen and why that's not going to happen. Deep first, before the show.
There are problems with inaccessibility exist on your side because currently states have the lack the infrastructure to build things such as new grid lines for rural communities. Private corporations have greater financial pockets to be able to do this.
I think that they can have an ability to actually build a lot of these things. I don't think states do not have resources. Plus, oftentimes if you have state-owned enterprises, for example, building airlines, they can oftentimes give you back this revenue that you need in order for you to get a lot of these things. We think it's a lot easier that way. In a world in which even if corporations can build you the best railways, if I cannot pay my bill, my utilities are going to get cut. I'm not going to get access to a lot of these things. I'm not going to get the water that I need. First and foremost, why they're exploitative and why it's bad. Number one, they have the capacity to lobby a lot of these governments. It means that because they're profit-oriented, they oftentimes can bypass a lot of laws in order for them to get the things they want. For example, if I want to build a railway, I can build it however I want. For example, the pipeline in Canada, right? I can exploit indigenous ground and compete on indigenous ground because I can lobby the government to listen to me because at the end of the day, I don't have accountability towards the people. Secondly, also is the fact that oftentimes they were able, it's the fact that they are able to up and leave. That means that they don't have to see what happens to people on the ground. So long as they get profit, they are able to leave a lot of these things. The Congress is always better. When the government is accountable to a lot of these people, when they have information and data regarding the people and they understand the people's needs, even the most corrupt government knows that they have to protect their needs, and you think that the government can give you exactly what you need.
I think the leader opposition for her, the deputy
clarifications to make to open opposition. First is about the context. And they push a lot on this by saying like democracy is not as we portray. But here's the thing. Developing countries also mean a developing democracy, which means oftentimes these countries are pseudo-democracies, or sometimes they have no credible opposition, oftentimes there's systemic push down on minorities like you're reading us in Burma. What does this mean and imply? It means the harms that Andy told you are extremely prevalent. While there may be fair, because that means that in the distribution of resources, it is going to be uniquely unfair in how it is distributed, because there's less incentive for these democracies to have incentives to give resources to people who are not part of their voter base, or part of the people that have been systemically and historically oppressing in order to consolidate power, to have authority, to have power in the rest of the country. I think there's a disparity in how the resources are distributed that has never been addressed on our side. I think we've told you why politically this creates divide and why it's harmful in creating a long-term, systematic, and stable democracy. But secondly, on the idea of like a really strong democracy where the economy is like where there's credible opposition, the developing countries that are doing quite well on the democracy level, then I think in this case this debate is moot, because even if you privatize it, like look at all the Western countries who are doing this, the government then has more power and mandate and ability to consolidate political will, to have either some sort of checks on corporations that go too far. I think this is not a very important part, and the more important part is understanding how this will affect democracies where the resources are not being fairly distributed. The second clarification I think we need to make is about the idea of privatization. And we also received POI from CEO. Like, what if people just sell to their siblings? If you're first try to price out the siblings. But second, and we'll tell you why, even if this leads to neo-colonialism, why we still prefer that unequal distribution of resources right now. But secondly, I think it's nepotistic. Why? Because it means that even if you are nepotistic and your friends and daughters and sons are in charge of the company, if it's not doing well, then it allows other companies to come in and take advantage. It means that other shareholders are going to make you leave the company if you're not doing a good job. It means that you're going to be priced out. Those are unique benefits of privatization that has never been comparatively addressed to us by so none of their harms, I think, are very substantially important. Rather, what is something that Andy told you that was very important this week? It was the idea of inequality. That means that oftentimes in these democracies, when there's less incentive to redistribute resources based upon like ethnic lines or religious lines, it means you see things like less hospitals or less good water supply going to regions where there's political opposition, where there are like religious and ethnic minorities, where there are Rohingyas, where there are like where there are non-Alawites in the Syrian region. Like all these are extremely harmful for a multitude of reasons. Firstly, because if you want to consolidate a long-term developing country to a developed country where there's political stability, you have to try to decrease the barriers between ethnicities. The problem is this: oftentimes autocratic governments play up this hatred by showering favors on certain ethnic groups and not giving those favors to other ethnic groups. That means there's going to be a lot more conflict on this side. Plus, I think we pointed out that, like, even though Syria was like economically strong region, the huge amount of hatred between the ethnic majority and ethnic minority all over, I think it is very important to have some amount of political stability looking at long-term nation building. But secondly, we also pointed out that this leads to a direct clamping down on opposition. Like, if you want resources, if you want the state to build your hospital, if you want the state to build your water supply or roads, that means you're not able to rebel. That means you're not able to speak out. That means if you speak out, probably your water supply is going to be cut. It means the weaponization of the economy upon minorities, you uniquely have no power to speak against this. I think Andy told you why privatization is preferable. Even if privatization doesn't mean in every sector of the economy, it still means that we're able to more fairly distribute resources compared to the ethnic lines that will lead to huge amounts of anger and tension later on. But also, why this is not uniquely happen in the situation, why in the counterfactuals they're less likely to happen? Firstly, because investments are more likely to go to all regions. Like, privatization doesn't work as in like one company only is to like rich regions. It means if one company is doing this, that means all the other smaller companies have more ability and like incentive to go to markets that have not been exploited yet. That means you're more likely to try to tap into resources and tap into areas that have not been dominated by bigger monopolies, because there's going to be a niche in the market where you're able to make profit incentives. Notice that these are the kind of companies that are uniquely more likely to receive investment from World Bank or investment from World Organization, who care about access to resources and water to people in like more impoverished nations. Which means that yes, there are probably going to be niche markets and niche companies who adhere to this, and also these companies are more likely to be enabled and empowered because they're doing something that is objectively good and objectively in standards of what many NGOs and financials believe. What is therefore very important in this debate? I think there's a missing comparison on op-ed. In that, privatization allows multiple actors to enter. The comparative here is this: some regions will not receive aid. I think this is true. I think in a developing country, a developing economy, clearly some people are going to lose out. But why is this still practical on our side of the house? Not only did Andy tell you why we minimize this risk by making the economies much more efficient, but we also told you, even if there are still divides based on poor and rich regions, we at least eliminated the political and racial and religious divides that have created ethnic historical tension among groups, which means it's more easily continuously in the future to have more consolidated political movements that are reach across these kind of divides. But secondly, why even in the cases where like neocolonialism happen is still preferable? Firstly, because we think FDI is more likely than our side of the house. Because if you see countries that are very politically close to China or Russia, it means that the US government has less ability to invest in the state-owned companies because they're afraid that the money will go to the dictators. They're afraid that the money will be politically seen as a bad move because they're supporting governments that are also being supported by China and Russia. Why is privatization uniquely different? Because private companies are not necessarily the political entities that the government is. It's vastly different because the people who are making money are different. It's also different because the connections behind the corporation are different. That means we're going to have a massive increase in foreign direct investment on our side of the house because Western countries and Western corporations are more likely to be feeling okay to go in. More private companies will feel okay to go in because they're also not propping up dictatorships and authoritarian regimes. So we think there's vastly more like FDI on our side of the house. So economically, this is also very helpful long term. I think Andy pointed out why this is good for long-term development as well. But in the ultimate trade-off, even if this leads to some level of neo-colonization, why do we still prefer this? First, because we want to know that this is the only unique way to help minorities. If you are an authoritarian or more dictatorial regime that is unwilling to help the religious and ethnic minorities in the region, and the fact that there are private companies coming in with like incentive to tap into those areas and build roads and build hospitals and make factories there, means that it's also initially more important that these are the unique actors who can help these kind of minority groups. I think that is something that we still prefer on our side of the house. But secondly, also noting that a lot of countries that have been developing have developed like the Asian tigers also rely directly on things like foreign direct investment and other kind of privatization systems. I think economy also lies on our side of the house. If you ultimately believe that in this debate, it's not about like how do we grow economy short term, but how do we grow an economy that's fairly distributed and thus not lay the background for hate in centuries to come, I think we're seeing a open government today.
In the opening half, there's been a gross misunderstanding of what SOEs are, what they look like, and why we would want to eventually have a conversation about privatizing them, right? In this debate, there are two questions that we need to evaluate. Firstly, how do we best ensure that SOEs in developing nations run efficiently? And secondly, is the privatization the best way to do this? Note that it is the people on the ground or the people who depend on these state-owned enterprises that suffer when these state-owned enterprises can deliver or can bring about the services that they have to offer, right? We think what we'll do as closing government is we'll give you a contextual reality on how these SOEs in developing nations look like and what they do, and what is the harm when they fail. But secondly, we'll give the benefits of privatization and why is that the best route for developing nations, and lastly we'll show you why we then win the debate. Okay, we think that there are a few issues of the direct responses before we get to the extension. Firstly, opening opposition speaks about how this creates strong companies, and these strong companies are going to compete to win the tender and therefore monopolize the system. We say we are okay with this, so long as they can provide the service that we want. Notice that extensively I will analyze in our extension why this competition is a healthy competition, because it is a competition about who wins the tender, but it's a competition who provides the service better, the service that the state has failed to provide for the people at the end of the day, right? But secondly, they say because they are profit orientated, they will do things quickly to build better infrastructure. We say this is not true characterization. We say because they are profit orientated, they want to ensure that they keep the tender in the next or win the bid in the next maybe set of election to keep that to keep offering the service to the people. This is particularly important because it allows for the state-owned enterprises or for these enterprises to offer the services that we want efficiently, right? Secondly, they speak about lastly, the issue of access control, but we'll speak about this access under why state enterprises fail in the first place, and we'll explain why then privatization is the best thing to do. First issue of which is the contextual reality of state-owned enterprises in developing nations. So we need to know that developing nations, and nations mostly in Africa as well, were previously state-owned, right? When they moved then to being para-state, for example, in South Africa, ESCOM is owned by state, is owned by private, even with SAA in the railways, right? We say this motion, what it requires us to do is move to the last resort, which is then we privatize, right? Because we've noted that they failed as when they were fully state-owned, and they were still having failings as when they were para together with private companies. Right? We say this is particularly important because it is better for developing nations, because we, at the end of the goal of this debate, is that we want nations to develop or move better, right? But we become better in providing these state-owned services, because note that these services are essential services. Services like travel, services like education, services like health, services like railways. So these are services where we can't afford to have failures, and if they fail, they impact those states importantly, right? Then we need to then analyze why do state enterprises fail, and we have three reasons for this. And firstly, because in the developing context, that the involvement of government in these state-owned enterprises has resulted or results in corruption, right? When executive leaders in the running of these state-owned enterprises put their friends, put in all the people that they were with, like their colleagues, right? We say this exists because this exists because the state is running it and would think that they are running it the best way possible. However, they are not, right? We give an example of their Transnet in South Africa, where they went and bought trains that couldn't even fit on the railway that they were supposed to transport people. We say such errors are very important errors, but they're errors that are costly to the state, but also errors costly to the government. And we think that we can't be making such mistakes, right? But secondly, we speak about the idea of lack of capacity, where states most of the time have capacity to carry out these functions and to carry out these state-owned enterprises, right? But then lastly, the state-owned enterprises fail because now they become too costly to run as a state, right? This means or results in things like bailouts, where states now need to start paying bailouts to railway department or paying bailouts to the healthcare department that has failed to carry out the services, right? We think that these reasons show why state-owned enterprises fail. But now we need to move that why the privatization is the best route for these state enterprises. And here, firstly, we give it a good example of Sierra Leone, where they privatized their education department to America. Right now, that improves their pathways, that improves their performance as a state-owned, as a department of education. We say that we want that kind of policy to be enacted in developing nations because when it outsources the running of the enterprise, those companies, when they come and bid for the enterprise, they bid with the intention of how best do we make this service efficient or how best do we deliver the service efficient, right? We say firstly, because it then becomes a good thing for these developing nations in carrying out their mandate as government. Because open opposition argues that it is a government mandate to carry out the to carry out the handing out of state services. We say that's true, but at a point in time where we can recognize and agree that the government is unable to carry out those services, or they are failing because of their corrupt ways, we say that we opt for the route where we privatize those state-owned enterprises and we give it to a company that can carry out the function. We say it does nothing to the mandate of the government because the government is still carrying out its mandate, it's just not doing it directly and that's an okay thing to do. Yes?
So in countries where situations are so dire and SOPs don't have that capacity, why is it not likely in your world that MNCs can exploit this need, manipulate prices?
Oh yes, I want to respond to that also. There's a big mischaracterization. MNCs and SOEs and companies that bid for SOEs are very different. Like MNCs are just companies that Coca-Cola will travel the country and do jobs and things like that. We say state-owned prices, those are people who are specific to the particular department of the state, right? And I forgot to respond to this earlier. So these are specific because they deal with specific departments such as rail, departments such as airways, departments such as education. So already that argument can exist in this debate because MNCs do something, or consider they have other harms that they do, but we say when companies that bid for rendering services or efficient services for that state enterprise, we would allow it for it to happen, right? Lastly, we say now that the state then acts as an auditor on this company, right? We think most importantly, because when the state is now looking at oversight, it's able to say, look, you've done this for my people, you've done this for our people, you failed here, maybe perhaps you should consider another tender or consider another company who can carry out the service better. We say we are better for businesses, consequently, but also better for the state, because now when businesses compete on the basis of who provides the services better, we say the state benefits also in the end, right? As closing government wanted to do, we've given you the contextual reality of how developing nations look like and how state enterprises look like in those states and why they fail, and we've also justified why privatization is the last resort that we need to opt into right now because we've tried other alternative means such as fully state-owned and private government.
I think member Governor Chris remarks by the member active provider that speaker position to open up the floor for the
rely on that privatization will be successful and there'll be good private market after the privatization. Everything they say depends on that, and we know that sometimes in the world privatization does work, sometimes it doesn't work. And we got a lot of good reasons for opening a position why it could not work in some cases. What we will show you is why this specific process of privatization in these specific countries is inevitably bound to lead to bad results and very corrupt results and under performance of those companies. So pretty much everything that they say is good about private companies, and we don't deny that in some cases private companies are good, is actually going to fall. A few points of direct rebuttal, then we'll go into our points. Now, again, they say that SOEs are bad, they are difficult. That's not comparative. We will show you that it could be even worse. And if the government needs more support and expert advice, they can always go to the World Bank or the IMF or other international organizations that are very happy to help such governments cope with their failing services and actually improve that. You can bring experts, you don't need to privatize. You talked about bailout. Bailout, let me remind you, exists in the private sector big time. Remember 2008, pretty much in every market. You said also that the government can actually supervise those companies if they fail. We will explain later why regulation, especially in this situation, in these countries, is completely futile and does not work. I'll get back to that in more detail. And finally, you say they had this tender, they come and promise good things, they come and explain why it will be good. Yes, but the tender is corrupt by nature. I will get into that in a second, and that's why whatever they write, whatever they did is completely different. So let's go in more detail, and this is critical, why the privatization process itself is corrupt and is going to fail. Now we have to understand, we're talking about businesses that run a lot of money. This is hundreds of millions, up to billions at some point, depending on the country, that are worth a lot to the state. What happens in those tenders, the way they privatize, they issue a tender, they ask some bodies to come and compete, who gives them the best offer, the best proposal, the most money, and they win. Now, how many bodies are even likely to compete in those tenders? The answer is very, very few, because of the nature of these specific developing countries. First of all, only very few people, companies and rich people know the market enough to go in there. Very few people have the money to even have those investments. And international bodies are simply not interested because they don't know the country, they don't know if the government will stay, they are afraid of the instability. What will happen is that very few people actually get access to all those tenders and win them all. A very good example are the Gupta brothers in South Africa that happen to be very well connected to the government and happen to win a lot of those tenders. Now, those bodies, such as the Gupta brothers, are supportive of the government politically. They are very well connected. They donate to them, they have political clout. This is classic chronic corruption that happens in those countries. And also remember, these are huge tenders. You can see corruption or bribe going to politicians and to civil servants in very large numbers. Look at what happened in Brazil. It was the oil company. We're talking about $1.5 billion of bribe over several years. This is worth them a lot. And those companies, those bodies that work with the government also have a lot of influence on the tender itself. You may think the tender is objective, but this is completely not true, because those corporations that compete actually help the government to write the tender in a way that could help them. And then they help the government, officially or not officially, to also assess the result. The result is that you get the end of the tender in a much lower cost, a lower payment to the state. You get important things which are going into private hands that are not worthy, better, worse services, and I will talk about prices that go up. Now, we're talking about the second point I want you to assess is why prices are bound to go up. Now, there's two market failures that happen here, and they're specific, even worse in those developing countries. One of them is the creation of monopoles, and as we explained, this is worse here because you have very few hands competing, and they have a special influence on those tenders. Second, this is also because some of them are natural monopoles, like transmission of electricity. This is bound to be. But second market failure is you have hard, rigid demand to these services, such as water, electricity, and medicine. And in those rural areas and those developing countries, there's only one supply. This is a market failure that creates prices to go up if it's not regulated by the government. Now, regulation is not going to help, and that's also engaged with what I said before. Why is regulation going to fail easily? Well, one of them, as we explained, because the companies are connected to the government, and they are also connected to the service, the people that actually are supposed to oversee how they do. Second, private companies have no transparency. You don't really see what they do. And third, all those corruption that states in government will actually prevent any kind of effective regulation on those corporations. So we will not see much supervision. Yes, I'll take it. Okay.
So I think it's fair to say there's a possibility of failure on both sides of the house. But in the cases in which we succeed, we massively decrease resource inequality and the problems that arise from this.
Thank you. The point is that inherently you will not succeed. This is a rigged system. There's no way you can succeed, and it is always better to fit it inside the government things. Now, lastly, very importantly, there are those public considerations that are going to be completely ignored, especially important in these countries. Why especially important? Because these countries, because of the nature of being developing countries, have a lot of rural areas, underdeveloped areas, and that's, unlike, let's say, the US or Canada, it is imperative that the state invests more in those areas. This is why, specifically in these countries, you have to put the social considerations and the public needs above profit and above the current what the private market can do. The private market, those companies will only invest around the capital, around where it's lucrative. They will never go to those remote areas where there are those minorities, or just poor people, or just people that have few reasons. Finally, well, I guess I have done for that. So please.
I thank the member opposition for their remarks, but the government whip reminded us who they were down to the floor. It was at the government.
There are strategic failings with both of the teams along this match, because in the opening half we hear a very extreme characterization of this debate. They only debate this in nations where the governments have perverse incentives to use power utilities, or to use national utilities as a means to politically suppress individuals or exclude individuals. We think while this may be true, it lacks impact in this debate, because this debate happens for the majority in more liberal states or liberalizing states. So it happens in the majority in states in Africa. It happens in the majority of states in South America. Within these countries, the problem with SOEs is not that they are used to oppress individuals and ethnic minorities, but rather that they are inefficiently run, and that means that even though there isn't these massive ethnic tensions they want to characterize to you, nobody gets them. See South Africa, where Eskom, the power utility, is consistently in need of bailouts, consistently having to hike prices. They are not on their side because they are run inefficiently. On closing half, we think that they also just don't engage, because there are problems of things such as more corruption, there are problems of things such as a lack of investment and upgrading in rural communities, are things that exist in status quo. The Guptas have connections with the president or things like that, and that's why they're able to get their hands into SOEs. At the point where these are like enterprises that are privately owned or privately run, we see that that's likely to be diminished on this side. There are various examples of this. Fumo already told you about places such as Sierra Leone, where the public educational system has been privatized. But more than that, we believe locally, things such as telecom being privatized as well has resulted in a major increase in telecommunications in South Africa. We don't think that these teams have been necessarily engaging generally. Beyond those major strategic flaws, what else do they fail to understand? It's the contextual trend that we pay to. The fact that we've already recognized that SOEs run by states are problematic because they either fail completely. What have people done? Countries have tried to move on to a model of like parastates, where they are partly owned by states and partly owned by corporations or like run by corporations. Even in those cases, we still see like problems with the runnings of these states. Contextually, in countries such as Mexico, the new president wants to hold a referendum of like privatizing their their gas utility corporation, because again, structural failures with government in places such as Africa, those things still exist. Outside of the context that they paint of like oppression of racial and ethnic minorities, government bench can't do it. Cool. So why are we above all of the teams in this room? The first thing to ask here is, what is the economic role of a government in a country, and linked to this is why is privatization better? We think that the role of the government is to regulate markets and only to step into the market at the point where the market will not naturally produce or provide for certain goods. So for example, things like street lights, which aren't profitable, therefore the government provides them. But on things where they are likely to be privatized and be run better, we think the state should not be involved in them. Why is this the case? Firstly, we think that the states are unlikely to be low-cost producers. This is because of rampant bureaucracy, something which is like amplified in a developing world context where structures aren't necessarily the most efficient. This leads to things such as what we're seeing in Mexico and like in Venezuela, as they talk about, where price hikes start increasing. But secondly, though, they are unlikely to have the technology and the funds and the innovation that they seek in order to like develop more rural communities. We think at a point where you have a tender out for like tenders can be specific to certain communities, not just like people will be building around the city. You put a tender out so that develop like the national power grid in a rural, far distant place and have companies bid for that. This is also beneficial then, because the lowest cost producer is the company that gets the speed, and we think that that's beneficial. Profit incentives of corporations is also something that the government lacks. We think privatization is therefore better. Why is this strategically important? Because what we tell in our member speech is that these are sectors which are oftentimes crucial for the development of these nations. And so, for example, things like transportation are crucial in order for like your economic participants to get from home to work. At the point where Transnet can even provide like railways or trains for like the poor working class in South Africa, that's a massive failing that we don't have on our side. So let's do more direct responses on this thing. The first thing that they tell us is that they're likely to be price hikes. This is because of like the monopolistic incentives that corporations might have. Why is this a problem on two levels? The first is to say that these type of industries are always monopolistic in nature, or largely so, something that the closing concedes. Because things such as like building dams, things such as providing power require massive sunk costs, and like oftentimes only one big corporation can be able to do this. But what does privatization do? Privatization means that either the whole thing, once it has been built, because we think the infrastructure exists somewhat, it's just like poorly kept up and it's just like poorly maintained, it can be sold off to, I'll take you off at the end of this, can be sold off to a corporation to run that and to maintain that. Or you can like break it up into pieces as well. What this allows for is the competition that the closing actually wants. We don't think that the monopoly arising at the top of is necessarily a bad thing, but also think that there are ways to mitigate this. I'll take closing.
Look, say SOEs are bad, that's fine, but we still prefer incompetent SOEs that can be fixed over corrupt companies working only to the benefit of their owners. Cannot be fixed.
The problem that you are is that not going to be can be fixed. They just asserted that because we think history works on our side. We will give you multiple examples of how they cannot be fixed, and the only example of where like state enterprises has been fixed has come from the closing opposition. Second thing that they say is that like this, and this is more directly in response to opening, is to say that things like indigenous groups can be harmed further. Beyond just this being like a contender to the majority of the debate, we also think that that's not mutually exclusive to state ownership, because what they're characterized are patterns which exist in status quo where the state owns this and uses like them to strategically oppress minority groups. We think that even states can also be lobbied by private corporations to be pervasive towards certain groups. We see this with like America trying to build the Keystone Pipeline through ethnic minority lands. The important thing here is to say that on our side, at the point where the state does not have direct control of these utilities, and you're not for private competition, so firstly outbid each other to be the cheapest and get that so they can maximize their profit, but also now that the state does not control it, they have more of an incentive to be able to like try to regulate those markets. Regulation is easier than provision. We are proud to oppose.
I think the government, but for his remarks, might be opposition as kind of
It's important to understand that both governments in this debate assume a utopian world in which when you privatize companies, there are going to be really good companies that are really good with the market and really competitive with each other, so that you're going to have cheap prices. And this just isn't the situation, right? When we explain to you that there is going to be only one or two companies that are going to be given to relatives or nepotism or cronyism, then this actually disproves that there is going to be competition in the market. Once we disprove there is going to be competition in the market, most of the benefits that we get from both governments just aren't going to occur. This means that solely on this basis, it's enough for us to win the debate. But moreover, even when we have the question of where to invest more in minorities and other areas in the country, we say when you have less competition, we have less money to lead to these areas. When you have more expensive infrastructure, this just hurts them as well. We don't see why private companies are going to invest in this. So because of these reasons, I have two questions in my speech. First of all, where do we get more competition? Second of all, where do we take care more of people in dislocations or minorities? Before that, let's just explain why CG is out of this debate. 3 points. We get from CG 3 points, right? First point is, there's going to be a lot of private companies that are just going to be significantly more efficient, right? Because government will need to do bailout, and government companies fail in a lot of situations. First of all, bailout happens on both sides, right? If it's a crucial thing, then the government is going to bail out companies. But moreover, when do state-owned companies fail? Not because of something that has to do with the company, right? Let's take Venezuela as an example, because CG really like Venezuela. Venezuela failed when the oil prices in general in the world fell, right? This is something that the government didn't have control over. When does a railway fail and get destroyed? When there is some kind of an earthquake. This, again, doesn't have anything to do with the government. These are things that happen in the developing countries anyway. Why is this important? Because this means that private companies are going to fail exactly in the same situations where the government fails today. So this basically proves that their point is just not comparative in the way to describe it. But specifically under our side, it's just better. Because specifically when you have some kind of crisis, the government is just more able to take care of other people when it doesn't have a monopoly to support it. When the government actually cares about more and more people, and the monopoly just cares about raising high prices. Second point we get from from CG is that, you need a lot of money to build infrastructure. That specifically when we're talking about the dam, specifically when we're talking about railway, these are stuff that are in losses, right? You don't gain from building all of these situations unless the government gives you the money. So the money is again the same on both sides. We just think this point is irrelevant to the debate. And the third of all, like when they say, the government can't fix can't fix everything, they are talking about incompetence, which might happen in some situations. We're talking specifically about corruption, which is a problem that you can't fix at all. Let's talk about where do we get more competition? Because here's something important to understand about OG's case, right? OG's case is basically, governments really want to maintain their power. They really want to help other people that will help them eventually. They have a lot of control over the market, and then, you know what? They're just going to give everything up to the highest bidder, right? Because they just don't care about maintaining power anymore. They don't care about all the things that will leave them in control. So this is just an unrealistic case, because this means that specifically when these cronyist, corrupted governments that OG want to talk about are going to privatize, it's much more likely they're going to privatize to exactly the same people, to nepotentists who have a lot of power in their hands, to the Gupta brothers in South Africa, to Mukesh Ambani in India. These are the situations that we're talking about. So let's now compare between the two situations. Right? First of all, this takes down the entire basic assumption of OG, and this is enough for us to win over there. So let's compare between the two situations. No, thank you. Let's compare between the two situations. I said no. Let's compare between the two situations. Specifically when governments can be pressured, specifically when there can be protests in the country, specifically when a lot of people can now pressure governments to change their behavior. It's just better than a private company that can't be pushed into this situation. Why is this important? And this is important because when OO give you a possibility of this cronyism and monopolies occurring, we just prove to you that in each and every situation that OG is talking about specifically, there are going to occur monopolies. These are going to hurt people in each and every location, in each and every place, and they're going to raise prices. So this again completes a link that shows you that this is just the likely scenario. Yes, first.
I think I pointed out that even in worst case scenario where nepotism happens, the idea of privatization is that if you are failing as a corporation, other people can take over.
But that's the situation. Because the government has so much control and it doesn't want to give up its power, it's not going to create 10 different companies. It's not going to allow 10 different companies. Because when it privatizes, it's going to give it to one specific company that's going to be a monopoly. This is what our case proves. And this proves that most of your points don't stand. Now let's talk about where do you get where do you help more people in minorities and distant locations? Because OG has one point specifically about this, saying governments just don't invest in minorities in general. So we explained that in a lot of situations, people are just not going to get this infrastructure at all. Why? Because this infrastructure is expensive. Because sending out to remote locations, note, when OG talk about minorities, if we're talking about third developing countries in a lot of situations, then the ruling party has a lot of money and concentrates people in a specific geographic location. A private company has the same incentive to invest in the same geographic location as the government. What's the difference? The difference is that governments can be pressured by protests and all the stuff that we talk about in our extension, and this means that there is going to be some kind of change. Because even if you don't really dislike a minority in your country, then you still care about the order in the country and not having a lot of protests.